We hear sometimes people saying, oh, Master taught Kriya this way, somebody else taught it that way, which is right? Some people say, oh, he diluted it, and so on. Actually, Kriya is basically one thing. You read when Master talked about Jesus or St. Paul or one or another master, he said they had Kriya or something very like it. In other words, the mechanics of it are really, the purpose of it is not the mechanics. And so what Master taught, of course, Master, being a master, had a perfect right to make changes as he felt the occasion, the people, and so on demanded. But essentially what Kriya is based on the simple reality of the way our body is made. We have a nervous system, we're vertebrates. And when the life comes into the body, it begins with the union of the sperm and ovum at the medulla. The medulla is the central point from which the energy comes out, goes into the brain, goes down the spine, out into the nervous system. When you die, you withdraw that energy automatically and either go out through the spiritual eye, if you're enlightened, or sink back into sleep to leave your body. Now this is a universal fact, and you cannot say that your religion or this way or that way teaches differently without having to add, but they're wrong. Because this is simply the way we're made. Has nothing to do with belief, has nothing to do with isms, it's simply a fact. Now it's very interesting to see how very much we are based on the way everything is made. Master said that the spiritual eye, the star in the center of the spiritual eye, is the same as the body. The body is made in the image of God, literally in this sense, 2 legs, 2 arms, a head. This goes all the way across the board in many, many different contexts. One is that when God created the universe, he created duality. He had to. There was no other way he could do it. He didn't have stone out of which to carve us or something. He had to produce it out of his own mind. This thought is not so easy to understand until we take into account the discoveries of modern science, which show us that the body and that matter is really only vibrating energy. That matter doesn't exist except as energy. Energy, the yogis say, and a number of physicists suspect, is really only thoughts. And those thoughts are all part of the consciousness of God. It's interesting how nobody ever really goes into consciousness to talk about it because you can't really talk about it in a scientific way. You can see a chemical. You cannot see consciousness because it's with consciousness that you do the seeing. Therefore, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. But the truth is that the less you think, possibly the more aware you are. Restless minds make you less aware. Moreover, there are all kinds of creatures that don't seem to think at all, like mollusks and so on. Thought is not the issue. He did it. He made it the issue because he was trained scientifically, and he thought it had to be something objective. But science doesn't tell you to go back to the subject. They always speak about being objective. They don't say go back to the subject that does the thinking, does the looking, does the analyzing. Consciousness is the source of it all. There's not much to say about it if you just think of consciousness as such, because it's just there. We are conscious. But we can become more conscious and less conscious. And in this, yogis have specialized. How to become more aware, how to increase your consciousness. There's more to it than that. Consciousness is what we just heard in this mantra. Consciousness is bliss. Bliss is what created this body. Bliss is what motivates all our actions. the memory of a lost bliss. Life is the memory of a lost joy. This joy we can attain the more we go back into our source, as opposed to looking outward at the effects, at the reflections of what has been produced here. Now, how did God create the universe? It was like a very good analogy is the surface of a body of water. In order to create ripples, you have to move the water. That's what it says in the Bible too. In Genesis, God moved upon the face of the deep. And he produced these waves. Where there are waves, you have peaks and troughs. And the greater the wave, the greater the trough. People who are fully immersed in the world, they have great ups and great downs, great exhilaration, great depression, great success, great failure. But the more you come back to your own center, your own source, the more those waves begin to subside. Now, here's how the mechanics of it go as far as you and I are concerned, human beings. That duality is absolutely epitomized in the Irda and the Pingala, in the two spinal channels that all of us have. You know, when you open a fish, I don't suppose many of you eat fish anymore, but I know I used to, 55 years ago or whatever it was. And you see those little strings? Those are there along the spine. That's their Irda and Pingala. We all have it. All vertebrates have it. And as the energy comes up, there's an automatic reaction. It's actually the cause, Yogananda said, of the physical breath. And when it goes down, it's the cause of the exhalation. As the energy goes up, you inhale. As the energy goes down, you exhale. Now, with that inhalation and with that upward movement, there's also an objectification of duality. And so, as the energy rises, as you breathe in, you see things and you think, oh, this is great. And when it begins to go downward, you tend to think you want to withdraw from it all, and you think, oh. Now, it's not as if every time you breathe is... That would be ridiculous. And yet, you will notice that there is a correlation. There was a funny thing. We saw the Inspector General the other evening on video with Danny Kaye. It's really quite fun. But at a certain point, Danny Kaye represents a real threat to the counselors, who are all a bunch of crooks. And they've given him a glass of wine to drink, which is poisoned. And they didn't actually give it to him. He took it, and they were about to say, no, don't. And somebody said, it's poisoned. It's good. Oh, that's right. We'd love to see him kick off. So every time he's doing his usual song and dance, and every time he picks up the glass and just about to drink it, you hear this drum roll, and they rise up expectantly, and then he puts it down and says, This is the nature of the world, and you will notice that when you feel great about things emotionally, there tends to be stronger inhalation, less exhalation. When you feel badly about things, there tends to be more a consciousness of sighing. You have to inhale to sigh, obviously, but the emphasis is more on the sighing. It's like when my dad came back from the office in New York one time to Scarsdale, a little girl met him and told him, or tried to tell him, everything that had happened to her that day. I don't think she even knew him, but she just had to tell. And the thing that I remember is that after a while she said, I have to stop now because I have to breathe. Well, we need to understand several things. First of all, our ability to enjoy anything in this world depends upon this inner energy. Another point is that our ability to control this world depends upon this inner energy. The more you're balanced in yourself, the more you find that things just don't go wrong in the same way as they used to, and if they do, it doesn't really matter. What you have inwardly is something that is projected outwardly into the world. In fact, in a very real sense, everything and everyone in this world is a reflection of yourself. I don't mean, and I mentioned this the other day, I don't mean that when you die, the whole world will cease to exist. But nevertheless, you are a part of this dream, and to the extent that it affects you, you create your own realities, and you can do so more so if you really have control over the inner self. This is how masters are able to perform their miracles. They aren't really miracles. If you were to go back a few centuries and bring with you a television set, they'd say you're a magician. They wouldn't understand it. Well, personally, I think it is magic, because I don't understand it either. I don't know how it works, but we know it does. And masters who are able to use these things, it's not magic, it's not miracles, it's just operating higher law. Now you see again in this duality, the yin and the yang of human nature, of psychology. The masculine energy is the rising one, aggressive, outgoing, upgoing, whatever. The feminine energy is the inward drawing, the receiving. And both are necessary. Each is important in the balance. With only one, you wouldn't be able to do anything. You need the two. When I wrote this life mantra, it was a very interesting experience, because I don't know at all a single chord in that song. I didn't name the chords, and I don't know what they are. I don't think that way. But I raised my energy up. I said, I feel to write a song, I felt inspired to, that is a song for the angels, of the angels. And then that was raising it and then receiving it downward. And I heard these things, not literally heard, in my mind. And I knew what the chords were, and I found the notes on the keyboard and was able to write them in. But I did the whole thing in a day, which had I been working normally, it would have taken me days to do. But it was something you receive. Now this is the way to be creative. You want to raise your energy upwards, receive the answers, and then you know what to do. Until you can do it that way, what you do will be mind-born. Most music is mind-born. Most music comes from thinking, well, I want to do this, or I like it that way. Don't think that way. Think what wants to manifest itself here. Now with Kriya, we see that the masters have sent us several basic things. Kriya is the most basic of all. In addition to that, Master was trying his best, wanted to, thundered on the subject, create communities where people could live together, because it's much more difficult. If you're always having to mix with worldly people, it's so much easier if you can mix with devotees. Again, it's so much more sensible than creating huge experiments that almost always human ego and pride and selfishness and so on creep in to the point where it all becomes pretty much the same as it always was, not very different. As the French say, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. More things change, the more they remain just as they were. But if you can make it get a small group of people and let them come because they want to, and not because they're driven to by some dictator, and let them figure out for themselves how they can live together. You'd be surprised how many lessons we've learned just by being here together. But somebody said one time, you have some wonderful people here. And I said, you know, if you saw one or two, you could say they're wonderful. When you see this many, you have to say that it's what they're doing that's wonderful. It is. When people practice these principles, when they learn by experience and example from others, things that work and things that don't work, bit by bit you find a group of people who can set a model for the whole world. And boy, does the world need models now. I think that communities are a very vital part of what Babaji wanted to have and see happen in the world. So Kriya and communities. The next thing was that there are all these divisions of religion, and he wanted people to understand that underlying all religions is one truth. And you can't separate that truth by calling it Hinduism, Christianity, Buddhism, and so on. Those people who think in such sectarian ways are, they're of Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga was that era when people thought of everything as solid, water no longer a flowing thing, but blocks of ice. And so they would see this definition is the truth, rather than it's a definition of the truth. And so Christianity defined it one way. You can't define it any other way. This is strictly a delusion. The truth is that all people basically want the same things. Jyotish was telling you, excuse me. Jyotish was telling you yesterday that the underlying desire of all people is spiritual. Everything people want is to get away from pain and find happiness. Ultimately, this is that essential, not only consciousness, but essential bliss of every being trying to recapture its source. And you think, oh, well, I'll find it by eating an ice cream cone, or I'll find it by creating a family, or I'll find it by having a beautiful cottage, or in this industry or that industry. These are all reflections of something you want in yourself. Really, the joy that you always feel is inside. You see this beautiful painting, your heart rises up in joy. It's not the painting that gives you joy. A turtle could look at the painting and wonder if it was good to eat. It's you who give yourself joy because it satisfies some idea in your own mind. The energy rises and you're left with joy. Now, when we can understand that people are all spiritual, but they direct their spirituality in the wrong way, then we can see what Kriya really can do for one. That Kriya takes that energy and turns it inside. Now there's an interesting contrast and parallel between India and the West, America, perhaps particularly, because it's really the wave of the future. In India, when you read the Autobiography, you find that all these people, as soon as Master appeared on the scene in front of some saint or other, they go into the silence. And maybe a couple of hours later, they start talking, then they go into the silence again. It's rather different here. However, I have read a number of Westerners arrogantly claiming that this is just as good as that. That's not true. It's got to come from that silence in order to become meaningful outwardly also. But the combination of the two is also very good. And this is something that India is learning, and we're learning the other side. So that every day, I don't say meditate 18 hours a day like Ram Gopal Mujumdar, for the simple reason that you wouldn't be meditating. You'd be sleeping. Master one time, Mrinalini came to the breakfast table. He said, "You haven't meditated together." She said, "Sir, I meditated a whole hour." He said, "You should have meditated half an hour." He didn't mean the less you meditate, the better. He meant that he wanted her to meditate with concentration. When you meditate with full concentration, then even, I know he said to Dr. Lewis one time, "Well, you're pretty well set now. Just do 1 or 2 Kriyas, that's enough." Because with full concentration, you can get that joy just by sipping a little bit by reminding yourself. You can't make absolute rules on these things. Even the number of kriyas that you do depend on several factors. Do you feel comfortable doing a lot? Yes, it's good to get counseling. It's good to say, well, may I do more now? But Bernard asked Master one time, well, what about people who live far away and can't ask? How are they going to stay with their 14 kriyas morning and evening? Master said, don't worry about it. If they're sincere, they'll do more anyway. So I think that we need to understand that excessive obedience is not what's being demanded of anybody. Enthusiasm is what the Masters really want from us. And the more enthusiastic we are for what we're doing, the chances are we'll be doing more kriyas. The issue then is don't do too many, because then it can become automatic. Like Mrinalini being told, don't meditate an hour. She was just a girl, 15 or 16, and she was not ready to sit a long time. So she wasn't putting her whole self into it. It wasn't a counsel to others, and he wasn't telling her to lay off because you're not doing it well. He was simply trying to say, be concentrated. He told us to do 108 kriyas morning and evening. That's a good number for those who have been doing it for a while. A bad number for those who are doing it the first time. Excuse me. The important thing is that we do it with real concentration. If we can bring that consciousness inward, then we can discover the secret of divine creativity. I mean, when I bring the energy up and then receive inspiration, that's fine, but it's not quite enough. Much more important is it to bring that energy up in the side and bring it down in the deep spine. When you can do that, every time you exhale, see the essence of meditation, the essence of spiritual progress is receptivity. You don't have to accomplish anything. You have to receive that which already is and that which you are. And so when you bring it up and bring the energy down, try to feel that you're going deeper and deeper into yourself. In that practice, you'll find that with each kriya, you go finally, first of all, you're in the Ira and the Pingala. You want to so magnetize those two channels that the energy becomes drawn into the deeper spine, the Sushumna. But there's even a deeper spine than that, as is exemplified by the spiritual eye. You go deeper and deeper into this until there is just that sense of union. You don't have to, and it's an odd thing, you don't have to go out and become one with everything. You have to become so centered in yourself that there are no more sheaths to shed, and suddenly you realize you are one with everything. God is both large and small, both infinite and infinitesimal. But the odd paradox is that he's neither large nor small. Space and time are simply delusions. And if you can really get into your own center, it isn't as if suddenly you reach out to everything. You are everything. It's a mystery that can't really be explained deeply, but this much can be understood. The more we can live in our own inner center, the more we know that everything that we do is somehow not necessarily under the control of our will, but all is in harmony with the way we are and the way things should be. I decided to sit down. I don't say everything works out always the way it should, but it's just amazing how often it does. How often just little things somehow fit into place and you don't quite know how or why, but there they are. you're supposed to, well, I had a fantastic experience one time. It was in India, and there was an Indian friend of mine, Dr. Mishra, who was studying here in Davis and got his degree and actually became known in his field. And he went back to India, and I wanted to, I lost his address. I had been wanting to go visit him, but I didn't know where he lived. I knew he was in Orissa, which is south of Calcutta, and I had to go to Calcutta, and the one regret that I had was that I'm not going to be able to meet him. Well, this is the amazing thing that happened. There were two friends of mine who were supposed to come and meet my plane. They weren't there. Well, what do? In a foreign airport, nobody's there to meet you. You don't know the ropes properly. I just thought, well, I just sort of, well, like with Kriya, held up the energy to Divine Mother and said, well, what do you want? I didn't worry. I didn't do what many people would do, which is rush to the nearest phone and sort of empty your pockets trying to find the address to phone and so on. Just calmly said, well, God, what do you want? Do you know that in that moment, somebody passing me from a plane that had just been emptying itself of its passengers stopped in front of me. He said, what is your good name? That's the way they speak in India. What is your good name? And I told him. He said, oh, I thought it must be you. I've seen a photograph of yours, and I've been longing to meet you by a friend of mine, Dr. Mishra, who knew you in America. I thought, Dr. Mishra? Well, I want to meet Dr. Mishra. Where is he? And he said, well, he's in Calcutta. I've come just for the purpose of meeting him. So he took me to Mishra's house. My friends got there too late. I don't know what I'd have done. Turned out that all the hotels were booked, and it all worked out. But that first night I got to spend with Dr. Mishra. How many times have I seen things like that that seem just incredible? But a large part of it is just being centered in yourself, and the divine takes over. The divine helps you and plans your time. You don't have to worry too much. Shall I do this or shall I do that? Just let it unfold as it goes. You'll be surprised how much better things go that way. When I write music, I find that's the way to do it. Don't think, oh, I want to do this, or how shall I do that? You tell me, God. If you don't tell me today, okay, you tell me when you want to. But I'm not lackadaisical about it. Very often I will say, I need an inspiration for this, and I want it now. What is it? And as the moment I say that, suddenly I do know. Well, Kriya Yoga is an absolutely magic wand for changing the world. You'd think it would be a strange thing that Babaji would bring a meditation technique to the world. Not many people are going to meditate. Not many people are going to even seek God. And yet a few people who do it somehow change a much larger energy around them. I remember I wanted to look for the home ministry in New Delhi, and I saw 3 men standing there among the government buildings. 2 were Indians and 1 was an American. I was struck by the way they replied to me. The 2 Indians just calmly turned and waited to hear what I had to ask. The American, sort of with a good clap hands, here comes Charlie kind of attitude. He'd been sort of jumping up and down trying to charm them. And he turned to me, well, you're on, Jack. What do you have to say? It was so funny to see that contrast. This restless excitement, this calmness. Now, Indians have that developed in them because that is their tradition, even if they don't practice it, even if they don't come close to living a meditative life. And yet there's something there that they've all sort of picked up on. Well, in these ways, one strong voice one strong group of people, what happens is people see it and they like it. And even if they don't meditate, they sort of try to be like that too. Oh yes, it'll change the world. Communities will change the world. But even if only a handful of people, and Krishna said, out of 1,000, only one seeks me. Out of thousands who seek me, one finds. But we need to understand that practicing Kriya, practicing meditation, seeking God, it's not an either-or proposition if you do it in the right way. Yes, it's either-or in the sense that either your energy goes out toward the ego and the ego's involvement in all the things that you want to do in this world, or you go inward to your source, or you go inward to that inner bliss, and so on. That's either-or. But other than that, to recognize that everything you do outwardly can be reflection and help to remind you inwardly. For instance, that ice cream cone. Instead of picking up this ice cream, oh, excited, how wonderful. Instead of that, yes, it's pleasant. Feel your joy here. You'll find it's much more enjoyable. Maybe the worldly people have to keep convincing themselves, and finally when it gets old hat, they have to convince everybody else that they're having a good time. You just feel joy in yourself and you can enjoy everything. Look at a little child just looking at a clover leaf, or a little ant crawling on the clover leaf. It's a different thing altogether. They can look for a long time and enjoy. This enjoyment comes from being more still in yourself. Kriya Yoga can help people to live in this world instead of just everybody rushing off to the caves, not enough caves to go around. You can't have everybody doing that. But what Babaji brought us is a way that we can bring God into the world and bring the world up toward God to transform it. Aurobindo said that the superconscious needs to be brought down to this world. Of course it won't be brought down to this world because it doesn't belong on this realm of existence, but rays of that superconsciousness, yes. The rays of inspiration that come from being in superconsciousness, definitely. The more we have of the inner awareness of ourselves, the more we'll find that everything that we do is done well. And we must understand, and it's a very important aspect of what Master brought us, that our work, we need to work. You don't find God just by deciding not to work. The Bhagavad Gita says no one wins by refraining from activity. You have to act, but in the right way. Master said then your work helps your meditation, and your meditation helps your work. And of the two, if you need a priority, meditation is more important. And yet again, that must be done with a proper sense of balance. Master wanted me to write articles for the magazine. And I used to spend all my evening meditating and my morning meditating, and I'd probably meditate 6 hours a day. Then I'd go off and work in the garden or wherever it was that my unskilled energies were needed. And so I thought, yeah, I'll do it when I can, but this comes first. And he finally, after getting after me several times, I began to worry that maybe I should listen to him. He's my guru after all. But I said, sir, I'm meditating. And he says, no, give up some of your meditation to do this. Now, would you expect a master to tell you that? Master did. He said, remember, you've got to do both and do them with full energy. He told me when we were talking about my future work for him and so on, he said, your life is one of intense activity and meditation. And so it has been. The name Kriyananda is a very appropriate name for me, because Kriya means action. Unfortunately, I didn't quite mean it that way. When I took the name, I thought just Kriya Yoga. But action was what he wanted and what he's squeezed out of me for. Oh, listen, I'll tell you, I used to, when I was up there lecturing in the Hollywood church, I would think, I've got the bad karma to have to be out here lecturing. All those others can be home meditating. I thought it was just my bad karma. And yet, it took me, I'll tell you the truth, it took me 7 years before I was convinced it did any good at all. That may seem odd to you, but it's the fact. I would look at the clock up there and wonder if 5 minutes gone, the reason I thought that was that Dr. Lewis used to talk about people getting up and just blowing. Well, I didn't want to get up there and just blow. And I wanted to help people, but I didn't see that words were going to do it. But then gradually I discovered that yes, they can help. Somebody said that after a talk, he had suddenly, after all his life being an atheist, believed in God. I thought, well, that's something. And somebody else said, well, I'd been thinking of committing suicide. And after one of these talks, I just realized there's hope in life. And I thought, well, gee, that's not so bad. Bit by bit, I began to feel confidence in it. I never have been nervous lecturing. It's odd. I don't know why. I think basically because I thought that if I'm a fool, people might as well see it. It doesn't matter. But oddly enough, even when Master put me there, I'd been with him only 8 months, and he had me speak in his behalf in the San Diego church. I was 22 years old, and here this congregation had been waiting months for him to come. I knew the place would be absolutely packed, and it was. People leaning in the windows and standing at the back and completely packed. Well, the way they did it then, I don't know how they do it now, they had curtains that were closed. So the audience had no way to know who was on that stage. They expected Master. The curtains parted. Here this little boy was. But I was not nervous. I was really just thinking, those poor people, how disappointed they must be. So I didn't have time to think about myself. Anyway, the thing is, he told me that I have a intense activity and meditation. And I've seen that it's been a great blessing. But if I didn't have the meditation, the activity would have been just restlessness and wouldn't have taken me anywhere. Each one of you should realize that the activity you do for God is a blessing. It's not a misfortune. It's not just something you have to do to keep body and soul together. It's rather something that you can do to help uplift people. Everything you do should be done in a divine way, so that when you cook, you're putting your energy into it. You're putting your joy into it. When you work with people, don't think, I want to say this or I want to do that. Think rather, what does God want me to do? How can God inspire me? I've seen many times, I used to see in counseling people, that they would ask me things and I would say, well, I really don't know. I don't want to just talk off the top of my head. I didn't know. But the odd thing I found in every case was that when I really admitted to myself I don't know, I did know. In other words, when you can relax enough, suddenly then God can inspire you. Suddenly you do know what to say and what to do. Now this is a wonderful blessing. It's something that Kriya Yoga does definitely help us in. But Kriya Yoga is helpful on all levels. Here I am coughing my lungs out. I shouldn't say it. And yet Kriya Yoga helps you physically too. It's people who practice Kriya. Some doctor in Mill Valley or Marin County somewhere was saying that he's had several Kriya Yogis as patients. He said that they're much more healthy than other people. And it's true. You just, when your energy is right there, you somehow fill your whole body with energy. Same thing with the energization exercises. Everything you do ought to be a manifestation outward from this spinal energy. And that means the more you act outwardly, the more you should do it from this center. You see, most people act from here, from there. I've always remembered an experience I had on the ski slopes many years ago, where there was a lady on the slope who just, her way of getting down, she'd never been on skis before maybe, was to sort of cross the slope, fall down, cross the slope again, fall down, each time putting her skis back on. It was quite a laborious process. But I said, I've learned something really helpful. See if this won't help you. I said, instead of thinking, as you're told, to turn by, move your elbows this way and your hips this way and your knees that way and so on, instead of that, I found it very helpful to feel that I'm centered in my spine and that all my movements come naturally from that center. I saw her a few falls later. At the top of the slope, she was enthusiastic. She said, "Wow, it works." She said, "I'm falling much less now." And it's the truth. I have seen in everything, if you look at somebody who's good at sport, he's not all thumbs. He's centered in himself. Whatever the sport is, there's always a center from which everything comes. The same thing with your studies, the same thing with writing, with composing, with cooking. Cooking is an important thing. It's a wonderful way of sharing your energy with others. Master loved to cook because he told me it's a way of serving people. And when he cooked, he didn't taste the food. Well, they don't normally in India anyway, the Hindus anyway, but he would taste it here at the spiritual eye. And he'd know just how much curry powder or this or that to put in. It always was just exquisite. But the most of all was that it had his vibration. And you'd finish eating what he gave you and you just felt great. Well, when I read about women who feel that they're demeaned by being in the kitchen, I think that whereas I don't mind any woman who doesn't want to be in the kitchen, I don't like them putting down women who do. Because cooking is a great art, and it's one that a lot of men enjoy too. It's not necessarily a feminine thing to do, but it is an honor and a joy to be able, and that's why mother's cooking always seems to taste better. I've been into good restaurants, but because the consciousness wasn't good, I came out after all this tasty food feeling heavy and sort of uncomfortable. But mother's food, apart from the fact that you got used to it by growing up with it, it's more than that. She has love for her family and cooks with that love. It's a beautiful thing. Well, this is how we should do whatever we do. Do it with consciousness. And consciousness, above all, starting here in the spine. If we can get the world thinking this way, somebody wrote to me in Assisi one time saying, that shouldn't Ananda be more involved in ecology? And I wrote him back, I said, listen, if the whole world lived the way Ananda does, there would be no need for an ecological movement. We just would automatically live in harmony with nature and in respect for everything. Everything you do then, always refer it back to your inner self. It's a good thing even. And I don't want you to do it so deeply you drive up a telephone pole, but do Kriyas a little bit here to sort of remind you that this is where you're coming from when you're driving or when you're out with people at the office, at the desk. Just sort of return to your center. Live from that center. It's amazing how it can change your whole outlook. When people are all excited, if you can have that center, somehow they don't feel excited in the same way. You can have a calming influence on others. And if people get you upset, well, don't do it obviously, blatantly. at them, you might say. But just quietly go within, and you'll see that you're not going to be upset like that anymore. That when you have this inner calmness, then that restlessness and anxiety and anguish and so on, they go away. It's also true that when you're emotional, try not to do your kriyas then, unless you do them somewhat superficially. But the emotions will also block your kriya. Therefore, as Jesus said, when you go to the temple and have something against your brother, make peace with your brother first. So it's true, we need both. We need to, if we're going to sit down and worship, whether through kriya or any other thing, and our minds are seething with rebellion about something somebody did to us or whatever, it would be good to try to square it up with others. That's why, again, it's so important to live in this world and not just withdraw from this world. That when we have this pairing of the two, then we find that when we go into the meditation, our meditations are deeper. Otherwise, the mind can sort of roam around restlessly. I remember also at an occasion when, and I think I mentioned this recently, when I had to earn the money to pay for the building at the meditation retreat. And the costs were mounting far more than I thought we could. I knew I'd have to do it, but I didn't have it. I had to go out and earn it. And I was really, I have to admit it, with regret, yes, but it's the truth. I felt a little resentful of Divine Mother. I said, Divine Mother, I never wanted money. I've never been interested in money. Why do you force me to have to think so much about earning it in order to make this thing for you? Can't you just give it to me? Well, she didn't, and she did. But she had to do it through the work and not sort of bypassing the work. And so I did it. I did it. In fact, I rather resented having to do it. I did it anyway, but I found that my gain at the end was not that I could get the buildings and buy the property and all those things. Those weren't the real gains. The real gain I had was I received was the inner strength I gained by doing what I had to do. Whether I liked it or not was secondary. It had to be done, therefore I did it. If you do what has to be done, don't think that it's unspiritual. Do it for God, and you'll see that everything can be spiritual. Even fighting on the battlefield, as Krishna said. The whole theme of the Bhagavad Gita is, it's set in a battlefield to show us that life is a battle. Not a battle usually that you can win with swords and guns, but nonetheless you have to overcome the darkness in you. This means energy. Above all, the movement of the energy up the spine and down the spine until gradually you become so balanced that nothing can shake you. And Master said that you must learn to become unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds. I mean, that sounds very nice as a piece of poetry, but you just think of an earthquake. Many of you have lived in an earthquake. When the ground itself starts to move, the first moment for many people is one of panic. That's nothing compared to the whole world being shaken up in a huge cataclysm. But a man who is deeply spiritual, he won't be touched by that. Just let it happen. Mind you, you can't die. How many things have you gone through for how many incarnations? It all passes. Always remain centered in yourself. In this way, we can bring the world itself back to that kind of equilibrium from which it has been torn away by so many conflicting forces. If you were to come to this planet today from a planet where everybody did Kriya Yoga and lived in communities and loved God and all those things, walked down the streets of New York, I think you'd be appalled. We get used to it in a way, but nonetheless, you can't easily get used to meanness, pettiness, cruelty, anger, selfishness. They seem an outrage to human nature. And so it is that if we pull back and look at the world around us, we see that it's in a state of chaos right now. I don't think that there's been any really great work in any artistic field. And the arts are a very good thermometer, you might say, or a barometer of the state of the human being, of human nature. The drama, it's all cynical, worldly, taking for granted things like desire for revenge, hatred, anger. The music, well, there's just nothing inspiring about it. I was at a symphony in Rome a couple of years ago, or 1 year ago, I don't remember exactly. And at the Santa Cecilia. And they were playing some modern piece. I think it was by Menotti. I don't know whether they literally brought pots and pans from the kitchen to create their sound, but it sure sounded like that. This bedlam going on, no meaning to it, no structure, nothing. Just the more they can irritate you, the more successful they think they are. And just about then, I had left my cell phone on by accident, and Alan phoned me. Well, you know, it didn't mean a thing. I mean, so one more noise. Nobody even turned around. It was a fairly loud ring. I picked it up and said, call me back, and put it down. But just cacophony, and that's what you get used to. And so people begin to think, well, it's sort of like the emperor's suit of clothes. It must mean something, so therefore I'll say it, it's good. And you know, here you are watching a painting at a museum, and you don't know what it's about. But you look right. Somebody else is looking left. And you sort of raise your eyebrows, and he thinks, oh, you've approved of it. Yeah, it's nice, they say. Then the person on your left sees that these two people over here, so they start getting excited. And mind you, there's a very sort of a good demonstration of how in you are. If the more preposterous something is, the more you can find something nobody else can see. And so, if enough people all crow about this great work of art, everybody's raving about it. Picasso, I don't like the guy at all. And I don't know how you feel about him, but I felt from the first time I saw him, I thought this is a con job. You can't persuade me that that's art. He's very skilled, no doubt, but he did have a good sense of humor. He put out this new painting, and all his coterie were gasping and marveling and saying how beautiful and how wonderful, and did you see this new painting of Picasso's and so on. When the furor was at its peak, he told them that his pet monkey had done it. I really think that's a classic story. Because indeed, what consciousness is there behind, well, okay, what consciousness is there behind a face that is sort of like this? You know, completely divided. Well, his Ida and Pingle are totally out of whack. That's all I could say. To be original does not mean to do something different. It means to do something that comes from your own origin. And originality is probably even defined in the dictionary. It's certainly the common understanding of it, to do something nobody else has ever done. And so almost all art that you see is somebody trying to say, look at me, I've done something new. And it creates a whole consciousness of chaos. You see people walking through the streets like this, each one trying to be his little important rooster in his hen yard. How much better it would be and how much more beautiful it is. and how wonderful it is to go to ashrams and see there people living in themselves. Everything they do, everything they say, all their movements, in some way are projections of this inner self. But again, if you only have the teaching, if you only have the principles, be kind, be generous, be humble, be all those things, but you don't know the how, you don't know the secret of it, it's very difficult to keep it. You don't find many monks and nuns in monasteries who have that. Some you do, because after all, what they're doing ought to bring them all in tune. But they don't know how to do it. Most of them think, well, Jesus will do it for me, or Krishna will do it for me. You know, when Bhaktivedanta came to America, he came as a representative of a tradition. He himself was quite centered, but he came with that thought. It was painful to see it, really. Anybody, this is the tradition there, anybody who chants the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And anybody who chants that mantra will be saved. He believed it. He was wrong. In fact, he said to Allen Ginsberg, and Allen Ginsberg told me, where did I go wrong? Because so many of his followers didn't become transformed. He took them as crooks, they remained crooks. Why? Because he was mistaken. It isn't just chanting Maha Mantra. There's got to be this inner consciousness. Unless it comes from inside, sure, you have to follow the yamas, niyamas. He went wrong even in that. But you have to go further and further. Asana doesn't mean doing the yoga postures. It means being calm, centered, relaxed in yourself. Meditating in that position. Pranayama means control of the energy, which you can only get when you're centered. Pratyahara, interiorizing the mind, can come only when you've got this energy uplifted. And then from that follow these other stages of dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. But we can practice all of them to a certain level in everything that we do, and we should try to. In other words, no, you can't go into samadhi easily. Not very many people can. But you can have that consciousness of it's all one. I'm a part of that oneness. The more you're centered in yourself, the more you can bring that energy to a focus, the more you can internalize it and then let it come outward too. So that when you're talking, when you're writing, when you're involved in anything outward, you feel it's an expansion of your consciousness. Samadhi is an inward expansion. This is an outward expansion, and both are necessary. They need to be expansions from the center outward to the periphery. We need to see that no one defines that circle. As Master put it, the divine vision is center everywhere, circumference nowhere. I've always told the people here at Ananda, don't think of Ananda only as your community. Our neighbors also are a part of our community. What helps us but hurts them is not going to help us either. We need to think of the welfare of all. We need to think of the people in other sides of the world. We need to recognize when Master gave us that technique of meditation, he said it was almost as important as the techniques themselves. Visualize an expanding light and feel a whole world bathed in that light. You know, the Gayatri Mantra has the same purpose. May that light bathe and enlighten everyone. Pray for the world. This is what Jesus also is saying. If you have something against your brother, what he was also saying is spread that love, spread that light to all. When you meditate, one of the dangers of Kriya Yoga, Raja Yoga, every path has its danger. The danger of this path is that it can make you self-centered in a bad way. You're going into yourself, you become selfish. You're going into yourself and you begin to become indifferent to other people. Sort of, well, you're suffering, it's your problem. I've seen Raja Yogis do that. It doesn't excite me. I see that it doesn't work. And it doesn't make them radiant people either. But when you can include others, when there's no circumference, everybody is a part of your reality. That's a kind of samadhi. We need to practice that principle. Dharana, being able to fully focus on whatever you do, is very necessary so that you're not sort of, you know how people are with the radio or the television, twiddling the dial all the time, never see a program because they keep on twiddling to see what else is on. Well, that's how many people's minds are, and television is probably one of the worst influences around. I was in this barber shop in Rome where the barber had the television on, possibly to entertain the customers, more likely because he was cutting his hair like this. I don't know. But what struck me, I watched it for a while, they didn't hold a single scene more than 2 seconds. I thought, what kind of minds are restless if they see something for more than 2 seconds? This is what the world does for you or to you. It makes you so restless you can't settle on anything. Kriya Yoga, automatically, it's not a question of believing, it's a question of doing. When you do this, you automatically feel this calmness. Now, this is where the religions of the world have gotten away from what religion is all about. In the beginning, the Christian religion was one of meditation, service and meditation. They had communities then. They had individuals seeking God without permission from the Pope to do so. They had the thought that anybody can find God. He doesn't have to become a hermit, although anybody who wants to dedicate himself so sincerely as to become a hermit certainly deserves respect. But you notice that the early church so completely got rid of Gnosticism, you almost never heard of the Gnostics except as this group of heretics, and so completely trashed the whole idea of communities that they ceased to exist. It was only when monasteries came up that were completely subservient to Rome that Rome was able to feel, now we have them under the control, we can encourage them as long as they do what we say. This is the direction of institutions. When Master said he came here to bring back original Christianity, what he was saying is that he was bringing that Gnostic movement back, not in its bizarre exaggerations, but the truth is that the church pointed out the bizarre exaggerations and left out the real validity of those people seeking their inspiration between them and God, not between them and a priest who then carries messages to them from God, presumably. Those communities and Kriya, Master said that that Jesus practiced Kriya or a technique very like it. He said the same thing of St. Paul. There's a very interesting tradition in Spain that Jesus on the cross, just before he gave up his body, his head went like this. Well, that's Kriya Yoga. That's the highest technique of Kriya, where you leave your body. With that, I'm not going to teach it to you because you're getting it tonight, or you haven't even had Kriya yet, so I'm not allowed to. You know, when Roy Davis, for example, puts this in books, I think he has absolutely no right to do such a thing. When the Master says it shouldn't be done, we should do what the Master says. And when you receive Kriya, don't think, well, now I've got it, I can just give it to all my friends. Don't. Do what the Masters give you, because this is how it should be done. When you practice it any other way, it's not going to go right, and you're not going to be helped. It has to be done in the right way, with the right blessing. It's not something you can learn from a book. But when Master told us these teachings and this technique, practice the way he taught. There are different teachers who teach different ways. Let them be. But this is the way our Master taught it, and we know it's valid. Yes, he made changes occasionally. I'd been with him less than a month and he was dictating the Kriya lessons. out at 29 Palms. And he was saying that because we used to do it raising the energy through the spine, bringing it down outside the back of the spine. And right at that dictation, he said, well, that's the way my master taught it, but I'm going back to the way Lahiri Mahasaya taught it, which is going down through the spine also, and may my master forgive me. But he had the right to make that change, as Sri Yukteswar had the right to make that change over what Lahiri Mahasaya taught. Don't think because masters can do it that every Tom, Dick, and Harry can decide, well, I kind of like doing the Kriya this way. Some people have sometimes come to me with all sorts of fantasies as to how they do this Kriya. I said, no, do it right. Be orthodox in these things. It's important to be, because there are reasons for what they've taught. Now, with the practice of Kriya being sort of removed from circulation, you find that all the emphasis went toward humility. Well, of course, superiors love humble subordinates. Obedience, yeah, they love obedience. All the virtues that are designed to make you just sort of a non-entity, and they direct the whole show. These are what are called Christian virtues. If you look look into it fairly closely, you see that a lot of them are based really on control of other people. True humility, true obedience means openness to God. It's not an easy one. I was very obedient to Daya, but I gradually began to see that she's saying things that don't agree with what I know Master said to me. And I didn't know what to do about it. Well, he solved it for me by getting me thrown out on my ear, and thank God. But I really think that it's important to understand that our real obedience must be inward. When I asked Master, he said, do you give me your unconditional obedience? And I said to him, sir, what if I think you're wrong? And he said, I would never ask anything of you that God didn't tell me to ask. Well, that is a guru. An institutional head doesn't think that way. An institutional head thinks, usually, we don't do it that way here, because I've kept that example so strongly. But they usually think, how can we get this work out of that person? You know, Daya wanted to put me in the print shop. I said, that's not for me. I said, if you put me there, I know my great talent for machines. The machines would break in a week. I only have to go past the machine and it breaks. It's just not my thing. But they needed somebody in the print shop. That's why she wanted me there. I wouldn't do it really because Master didn't tell me that was my work. He said, your work is writing, teaching, editing. So that's what I was trying to do, not printing. But so one could say, well, maybe if you'd printed, you'd have become a better writer. I don't know. All I do know is that the motivation behind most institutional guidance is that we need you for something, not what do you need for your spiritual advancement. Now, true, and this is why we say here, people are more important than things. Always seek, above all, to go and consult your own inner guidance. Now, these things have their own little ways of getting exaggerated. Sometimes I've asked people to do something and they say, well, I'm just waiting for Master to tell me. Well, the point is, Master's got me to tell you. Master's got others here who are in tune with him to tell you. If you think that you want to do it just on your own between you and him, then why be here? Why not go where you can just receive that guidance yourself? But we see that it does work here, and I haven't seen it work very often the other way, because our interest is sharing. I never, when I counsel people, feed them all the stuff up. I've experienced this, and this is what I always tell people. Never. I always try to feel what they specifically need, because to be original with them means to try to feel it from their point of origin. Doing my Kriyas helps me by being in tune with my center to be in tune with other people's centers also. One time somebody was doing Kriya, and I said, now you're doing it right. I don't know how I knew. I could feel the energy in his spine, and that now he was getting it right. Well, the more you can be centered in yourself, the more you can be in touch with another person's center. And when you try to help them from their center, not from your own. Not from, well, when you've been on the path as long as I have, you'll know. No, wherever they are, that's where they are. And for God's sakes, they may have been on the path many years before, lives before you came, who knows? Everybody, all of us are equally children of the same one God. As Master said to Dr. Lewis when he was going to Los Angeles from Boston, and the doctor was feeling lost because he'd been depending on Master. Master said, never mind what happens to me, doctor. Don't forget God. And Dr. Lewis said one time, but you can do it. You're the Master. He said, God is everyone's Father. He is our common Father. Another time he said to Bernard, when Bernard said that, he said, what do you think made me a Master? Be centered. The more you have that center, the more you will know what religion is really all about. And I've gone to Christian services and sat there and felt absolutely thrilled with inspiration. And I suspect that if I had opened my eyes and looked around me, I would have seen people looking at their watches and whispering and all the usual things that happen. But it was thrilling because I'd loved Christ and I felt Christ inside and in the service, and it was wonderful. We don't need to say, oh, but this is my way. God is everywhere. But the more you live in Him, the more you know what religion really is all about. It isn't the Mass that gives you inspiration. It's your expectations of being inspired through the Mass. Is there more to it than that? Maybe. I mean, Teresa Neumann could always tell when a priest had been ordained, when somebody was an ordained priest. There has to be something there. Probably some power was passed on, even by a bureaucratic and businesslike cardinal. Who knows? These are beyond us. I talked to the Bishop of Assisi, and he was saying that you have to accept Jesus Christ as your only Savior. I had told him I love Christ, and we all pray to Christ every day. And he said this, and I said, well, honestly, I have to say that I think my job is to love Him. It's His job to decide whether He wants to save me or not. It's a presumption to say, you're my only Savior. Will He or won't He? That's up to Him. And the same thing with your spiritual path. God doesn't owe you anything. He is you. Why would there be a debt there? Why should He be flattered if you just pray to Him and use the right formula and say it in English, of course, the original original language of the Bible? Or like that Frenchman and Englishman who were talking about the wars between their nations, and the Frenchman said, well, how come you win so many battles? And the Englishman said, well, it's because we pray. And the Frenchman said, well, we pray too. The Englishman said, yes, but we pray in English. Well, God doesn't listen like that. He's in you. He is you. And your very Kriya is a prayer. So the more you do your Kriya as an act of devotion, just as when you do puja before the altar, just as in the Eucharist, there's this offering to the altar, just as in all spiritual rituals, there's some kind of offering, like the fire ceremony. It's a symbol of the fire of energy and love. And you cast these things into the flames and to be burned up. That's subjective, that's symbolic. But there should be this inner feeling that I'm offering my energy with that. That's why in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that this is the inner, the true yajna, the true fire ceremony, when you can offer your whole self up to be purified to God and receive back from Him His grace to be different. It's a universal truth. It doesn't depend on language, race, culture, religion. Those are all externals. But in yourself, your relationship with God, you've got your altar, portable altar wherever you go, portable temple wherever you go. Everywhere you are, wherever God places you, there you can seek Him. There you can know Him. Thomas Merton in the Seven-Story Mountain talked about these two old women he met in Harlem. And you know, Harlem is not a place of exalted energy. I don't know much about Harlem except what I've read. I do know that one time we came out the wrong exit from the park there, the Central Park, and found ourselves in the middle of Harlem in a motorhome. It was definitely not a safe way to be. And fortunately, the street ahead of us was empty and we could make some speed, because suddenly there were screams of rage from the sidewalk and people pounding after us, wanting to destroy us because we were rich. Well, we weren't rich at all. We just had a motorhome. But that consciousness of I and me and my and hurting other people to get what you want and so on. Here these two women were, and he said they were saints, and I believe him. They were saint in their absolute humility, kindness, wanting to help people, love for God. You can be a saint wherever you are. Somebody said to me recently from SRF are you enjoying living in Italy? I said, yes, I am. But I'm where I feel God and Master want me. And if they sent me to Harlem, I'd be just as happy to go there. Because wherever we are, that is where God has to come to us. Kriya is your sacred ceremony. Your body is your own temple. And even in a prison dungeon, you can still inwardly feel that divine consciousness. You can't be sitting in a crowd going, oh and e. Begin to sound like a donkey. Oh. But you can do it inwardly. And to do this inwardly a lot is good. Master said every time you have a little break, go out and practice Kriya 6 times, 3 to 6 times. Anytime you have a pause, don't just think, what can I do now? Just be in yourself. This is how we can change not only ourselves, but indeed, as Babaji and Jesus both working together ordained, we can change the world. Okay, that's here.